Hello everyone, and welcome to this video, which is in our Great Engine Game series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler, and whilst Leela's greatest fan, Mr. Beads, is out on his evening walk in Helsinki terrorising the neighbourhood, we are going to have a look at a great game between Leela Zero and Shredder in the World Computer Chess Championship 2022. So this is the opening, and it's a pretty topical Semi-Slav, so let's have a look how that came about. So d4, d5, c4, c6, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, e6, e3. And yeah, there are a couple of interesting things here. I mean, actually, in a game, in the reverse game, Shredder against Leela Zero, Leela actually played bishop d6, which is a very unusual move order. And after bishop d3, took on c4 and went b5 here. I mean, this normally what you do with black, you sort of wait before developing this this bishop to d6. You play the knight to d7 first, because you might be able to play a6 and c5 quickly. If you play bishop d6, then when white goes e4, you have to play e5 quickly, or e5 will fork the bishop on d6 and knight on f6. This would just have been seen in the pre-computer age as completely amateurish, showing no understanding of the opening whatsoever. But Leela made it look pretty good. So bishop e2 was Shredder's choice. I mean, actually, bishop d3 was Dragon's choice when I let Dragon analyze this variation. And actually, as you'll see, we just transpose into our main game here, e4 and e5. So, or something pretty similar anyway. So that's actually quite funny. I mean, Shredder went bishop e2 in this position. And then we get knight d7, castles, castles, e4, e5. And actually, white didn't seem to have a great deal of an advantage here. So this turned out to be a temporary pawn sacrifice from Leela. Bishop b7 attacking the pawn on d5. Bishop g5 was a novelty from Shredder, but after bishop d5, rook c1, rook c8. Takes, rook d1, and e4. Leela was doing absolutely fine here. So yeah, I mean, interesting stuff from Leela there, and yeah, maybe another discovery from engines in the Semi-Slav. But anyway, after e3, Shredder played the normal move knight bd7, very much still in book. Queen c2 now, and yeah, this is something quite striking. I mean, I've been doing all these video series on engine openings, and been quite surprised to see that the Queen c2 variation of the Semi-Slav has been really the engine's choice, even above the sharpest lines like the anti-Moscow gambit or the Botvinnik system. Obviously, the engines don't think that there's very much in it for white in any of those lines, but Queen c2 is perhaps the most promising. So we follow a very big main line here: bishop d6, bishop d3, castles, castles, d takes c4, bishop c4. Now, generally the engines seem to like this move very much, a6, which is, well, very, very flexible. I mean, black strengthens the idea of b5 and c5 quickly, but doesn't quite commit himself yet. So, could also just play e5 later, but without even weakening the queen side at all. b5 was actually my favourite move. I played this move quite a bit in the pre-computer age. And normally, actually, in my day, people brought the bishop back to e2, but bishop d3 has been much more popular in recent years. So bishop b7, and well, black's idea simply is to play c6 to c5, maybe even as a pawn sacrifice. But white plays a3, which is a very useful move. Two things basically to that move: stopping b5 to b4, so making sure this knight's a bit more stable, and also white's also threatening b4 himself, just clamping down on this c6 to c5 break. So a5 is played by black, stops b4. On the other hand, well, I mean, also supports b4, but on the other hand makes it harder to get c5 in, because you can't play a6 to protect the b5 pawn. You can see how how subtle it is, and every decision that you take has a a plus and a minus side. In general, I mean, black is sort of fine, and black's very active, and you always feel that black should be able to break out and equalize. But yeah, as always, it turns out to be quite a complicated operation. So e4 played with white, and now this is really the the key moment of the game. White threatening e4 to e5, so black plays e5, takes, and now this move h3 from white. And what is the idea of h3? Well, white is just simply intending to play f4 and then afterwards e5. Basically use those central pawns to brush aside the black pieces, and really, the success of black's play kind of depends in many variations on being able to play c5 even as a pawn sacrifice, and put pressure on the e4 pawn, maybe sacrifice this one but get the e4 pawn back. If black doesn't really achieve that successfully, then then white will get a clamp on the position, and white can be said to be better. I mean, I've never really felt that these positions as white should be anything. I mean, I think it's to do with that I don't like this piece structure at all. I don't like the idea of a bishop on d3 protecting a pawn on e4 and this bishop being on an open file. It feels like this is not really permanent for white. But yeah, I mean, that's also a slightly simplistic approach, I think. It's if white can achieve f4 and e5, then none of it really matters. I mean, there's quite a few good moves for black here. Bishop a6 has been the most popular move, and I mean, there was a recent game of Duda against Firouzja in the candidates, where AlphaZero quite surprisingly sort of went for a bad line, really. So after bishop a6, bishop e3 was the game, b4, and we get this this line that the engines just give here. Bishop c5, an exchange sacrifice, queen c7 takes, and then rook takes f8 was played by AlphaZero. Not a bad move, but after g3, now he played not such a good move. Apparently c5, bishop a2, rook c8, f4, bishop d4 check should be equal for black. Although, to be honest, if you ask me, just what is this position, I would have thought that white would be much better here. But yeah, Stockfish gives it 0.00, so I guess he must know. AlphaZero played, I mean, king takes f8 is supposed to be the best move, and after f4 we take and go bishop e5 and g6, and just claim that that this position with black's solid control of the dark squares and some weak kingside dark squares, that's okay for black. Still, I don't know. I mean, I'd feel, if anyone was feeling under pressure, I think it's kind of black that's feeling that way. But obviously for the engines, it's quite an easy, quite easy equality. But that's the main line. I'm not 100% sure about that line. I mean, rook e8 feels very natural, and actually this was a choice of both Stockfish and Komodo when I ran them in rapid games, 15 minutes plus 5 seconds, and we got these sort of lines: bishop e3, h6, rook d1, queen c7, and now for example a4, bishop a6, knight e2, queen b7, f4, bishop c7, and white's got his f4 in, but still, this center is still not completely solid, and but yeah, I mean, e5, I think again it's going to need some good play from black to hold the balance, and of course you get that from from Komodo and from Stockfish, but yeah, it's still, I guess that white feels a little bit better, even if it ends up being 0.00 for the engines. And then other ideas, I mean, b4 immediately is also possible. Knight a4, bishop d4, this is another idea, just stopping knight c5 because we take and the bishop on d3 is hanging. Again, this was this is the kind of scenario that I was always afraid of. You just go c5, you sacrifice a pawn, and then get lots of freedom like that, and takes, knight c5, rook c8, rook c1, knight takes e4, takes, queen c4, queen b2, knight e4 takes, and yeah, the engines agree a draw in this position. You know, makes you a little bit nervous always having the queen and some weakened pawns against 2 rooks like that. But yeah, I mean the engines do manage to draw these. So yeah, you know, I mean, I think it's one of those things where you say there is plenty of play in the position, you know, and even if the engines manage to make it, you know, into equality, yeah, it wouldn't be necessarily that easy for a human player. So yeah, in general terms, I think that this line is quite a promising one to investigate further in your games. In actual fact, Shredder played a move that none of the engines like, well, certainly Leela didn't like it, and neither did Komodo nor Stockfish. Yeah, Shredder played the move A4, which is a little bit hard to understand, really. I mean, I guess, you know, long term that Shredder's just thinking, well, I'm going to get my queenside pawns moving, and you know, just yeah, it doesn't really matter about having b4 immediately. I'm going to get in c5 and b4 somehow. But it feels very, very odd to play this. It doesn't really have an immediate threat, and well, you know, white just carries on with its plan. So yeah, it does feel like a very strange move here. Bishop e3 was played by Leela. Rook e8, and now we get the novelty in the game. So this was there was a correspondence game, Rook d1 and f4, which is quite similar, but not quite the same. Leela just plays the move f4 immediately, and now we get a real typical struggle here between white's advance of the central pawns and black's fighting back against it, because after takes, black plays c5. 2 of these pawns are hanging, but of course, you know, the pawn on e4 is hanging as well. So e5 played and c4. This is a very important counter move. So you know, obviously if the knight moves away, then well, this pawn would be hanging, this one hanging, and also this one hanging as well. So that would be a bit costly, but this counterattack is quite nice. The idea is that after bishop f5, we're just going to go g6. E takes f6, I've just got rook takes e3, which is just good for black. And if bishop g4, I can go queen d3, which is very nice as well. Again, exploiting the fact that this bishop is unprotected after takes. And well, I'm going to end up taking this one. I'll go bishop e4, and black's going to be fine. But yeah, surprisingly, bishop e2 is pretty nice for white here. Black plays bishop e4, very, very active. Queen b2 and knight d5, bishop d4, queen h4. Black attacking lots of things, and now f5. And well, yeah, I mean, certainly if I was calculating this at the board, I would be just a touch nervous, because, you know, this whole white position feels a little bit loose somehow. You know, I mean, we've got black's pieces are very active here. We've got some queen g3s, knight f4s here, you know, and yeah, even the f5 pawn looks a little bit weak. I mean, I'm a little bit nervous that that I was missing something and going to get myself mated. But yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, Leela's calculated very well that it can get away with this, and in that case, we've just got a very nice space advantage. I mean, here, in actual fact, of course, you're always looking to Stockfish. You know, how could you defend this? In actual fact, I mean, rook d8 was the move played by Shredder in the game, and it was also the move played by Komodo all the time. And actually, you know, Stockfish was making an incredible score as white in pretty much the same way that that Leela beat Shredder in the game. So that was quite interesting. What Stockfish managed to do, of course, was to hold draws. And it was fighting already for, yeah, I mean, basically taking immediate action. So really going for a somewhat risky approach here. So winning a pawn, but obviously the white rooks, major pieces, are getting very, very active. But somehow, rook g3, queen g5, g6, rook h8. Amazingly, one of those moves, queen h4, rook g8. So just making sure that the king side is thoroughly protected here, and yeah, somehow Stockfish just held this position, and there was no way through for white. So as always, you know, Stockfish finding these yeah, amazingly and far from obvious defensive structures. But this was really where, you know, the last moment where Stockfish was drawing relatively comfortably still. Yeah, I have to investigate a little bit more to see whether there's something better, but this looks pretty forcing, really. After rook d8, Leela plays quite beautifully in actual fact. So bishop f3, threatening just wanting to swap off the bishops, start swapping off black's active pieces. So Shredder tries its best to keep the queen and the bishop active, and one of the threats is going to be knight f4 here, threatening knight takes h3. So Leela just goes for the exchange of minor pieces. We're now in opposite coloured bishop territory, and plays f6. So obviously, g6, something like queen d2, coming into h6 is quite dangerous. I mean, it can still be defended, but this black queen's going to end up having to be passive just to defend against those threats. So black plays the very risky-looking g takes f6, rook f6, and now rook e6. Rook f3, queen h4, king h2. A little bit of a subtlety from Leela here. In my games, then Komodo was looking to play queen f2 straight away, but Leela plays king h4, and after bishop e4, queen f2, we get this position. This position. Well, after 15a4. I was running some games between Stockfish and Komodo from this position, and this was a position that Stockfish and Komodo were reaching in those games. So you can see that Shredder's play has been incredibly plausible here. One of the questions here is, how should black set up a defensive structure? Now, basically, if you have a look at what Stockfish did, Stockfish was managing to hold these type of positions very well, and this was because Stockfish was always aiming for a certain setup, and I'm going to show you that one. So this is a position after queen h4. Komodo was playing it like this as white, but it doesn't really matter. And what was Stockfish doing? Stockfish was simply playing h5, g4 takes. Now you can argue about whether it's absolutely correct to go for this structure, taking back with the h-pawn. You might want to have an outside passed h-pawn. But this is the key idea. Bishop g6, rook f4, king g7, rook h1, rook d7. And the key point is this bishop on g6 is covering h7. It's also stopping rook b1, so it's harder to attack the b5 pawn. These two rooks with black, they're both keeping an eye on the d-file and also keeping an eye on the e5 pawn, which makes it hard for white's bishop to move away from d4. And essentially, you're just going to end up waiting and waiting like this forever and ever. And the only key idea is that white maneuvers. Let's just fast forward about 15 moves, and after you play this move rook to h2, you're kind of threatening rook to h8, which is going to get quite dangerous. We're going to get a lot of threats against the king, and then that's the key thing that you do. You go rook d8, and then afterwards you just play bishop g6 again. And this was the type of position that Stockfish was holding, but it's simply a question of making sure that the bishop stays on this h7 b1 diagonal. This is another example of this position that set up here. The h-pawns weren't exchanged. White's avoided that, but again, Stockfish just stays like this and waits forever. But you just look at the disposition of the pieces, and they're really the most active that they could be. This bishop's excellent on g6, really holding everything together, and having the two rooks on the board, and this bishop tied down, very hard for it to move away from d4, makes it very hard for white to do anything. I mean, the open d-file can't be used. And we're going to compare that with what happened in the game against Shredder, because, well, you're going to see exactly what the differences were. So bishop e4, queen f2, takes. Rook d8 played by Shredder, g4 from Leela, rook g6, rook d1, bishop c6, and well, you can already see that that bishop, the bishop's just ending up rather passive now, defending the pawn on b5. And of course, Stockfish was putting it on g6, stopping the rook from coming to b1 and defending the pawn with a rook on d5. But, that rook on d5 was multi-purposing, attacking the d-file, defending the b-pawn, attacking the e5 pawn. So it wasn't really a passive piece. Whereas that bishop on c6 is just doing one thing, and nothing else. So rook f5, just stopping black from playing h5, and now Leela starts squeezing, and I mean Leela always does this absolutely beautifully. And after bishop d5, Leela takes the opportunity to swap off a pair of rooks here. Takes, rook f1, bishop c6, and rook e1, and probably a good idea here to just to think about the position and just assess it. I mean, we're used to, you know, opposite coloured bishop positions that, you know, really increases the drawing potential. But, you know, if there are rooks on the board, other pieces on the board, then, you know, very often the presence of opposite coloured bishops, you know, isn't really significantly increasing the drawing chances. I mean, there's a fantastic one in our endgame series of Stockfish winning a knight and opposite coloured bishop ending with one extra pawn. You know, it looked unwinnable, but Stockfish made it look like a forced win against Leela. Do take a look at that one. It's elsewhere on the channel in the endgame series. But that really makes you believe in the power of opposite coloured bishops. I mean, if you have a look at this position, you're going to see that white's got an awful lot of advantages. First of all, on the queen side, you know, 2 white pawns stopping 3 black pawns. That's never bad. I mean, black can play a move like b4, but after c takes b4, you know, we're always covering the queening square. So, you know, no worries there. And of course, the pawn on b5 can't be protected by one of its fellows, so it's going to tie down the bishop on c6, which is making the bishop a little bit passive. If we look at the pawn structure on the king side, it doesn't look beautiful for white, but actually this pawn on e5 is magnificent. I mean, it gives 2 outposts to the black bishop, to the dark squared bishop on d6 and f6, and in particular, if we get a bishop onto f6, then the black king is going to be in real problems, and of course a bishop on f6 would also shut off this rook on g6. And I think that's one of the main things that you notice is that, you know, the difference in potential between the white king, which could go all the way over to c5, start attacking these pawns, and the black king, which doesn't really have anything comparable. I mean, that's already quite huge. Also, you know, the fact that the white's bishop has got some really useful employment on f6, for example, whereas this guy, you know, hasn't got anything, you know, anything to attack really. It's just defending the pawn and nothing else. And of course, you know, with the pair of rooks off, white's got this d file to invade, and black's going to find it very hard to stop it. Now it's just yeah, you know, it's quite it's very difficult to say how black should defend this, and even if it's defensible against really good play. I mean, Stockfish was managing to defend this against Komodo Dragon, but actually that was mainly because Komodo Dragon's evaluation of you know, pure opposite coloured bishop endings once the rooks are exchanged is rather variable. You know, it's not at the level of Leela or Stockfish, and yeah, Komodo was making a number of mistakes, you know, assessing opposite coloured bishop positions with 1 or 2 extra pawns as winning, whereas they were just drawn. Yeah, I mean, Stockfish was winning these sort of positions very easily. For example, I mean, if we just and there was one very interesting thing here, because you know, one of the ideas I was looking at for black was to play f6 here, and there were 2 things to it. You know, one of the things that I just wasn't sure about was that if I just went bishop d4 and takes and rook takes, you know, I've managed to break that bind that white had with the pawn on e5. But on the other hand, you know, the white bishop and the white rook have got really active, and you know, we're going to be able to create a passed pawn, and this king's going to be able to come over to the king side. And actually what you saw from my Stockfish Komodo games is that a lot of these endings were just winning. You know, Stockfish was just winning all these with, you know, great play. I mean, really precise technical play, but yeah, this was really passive. And well, actually, you know, bishop d4 was probably quite decent, but actually what Stockfish wanted to do, and this was something again that I really needed some engine reassurance to know whether it was right or not, because these were the positions I was wondering about. This was my idea, you know, f5 and then h5, and we're just going to try and win this g4 pawn. But after king there takes, you know, I was really not sure at all about this position. You know, is white going to be able to to win this, or is black going to be able to hold? I mean, I had visions of white queening this pawn for the bishop and the rook, and this rook being exchanged, and then this pawn running, and black doing a break on the queen side, and the bishop can't hold the pawns, you know. But yeah, Stockfish was at plus 5.6 here, so I guess you have to trust it. I mean, the key thing is actually that white doesn't have to go quickly for the win of the bishop. You can actually just completely tie up the black pieces. You know, you go and then afterwards you're just going after that h pawn. For example, after h3 we go rook f3, and you know, black can't hold it. Black can't defend against the threat of queening and also hold the h pawn. So you pick that one up, and then afterwards you're going to come round rook f2 to f8, king to d8, and you know, that's just actually going to be trivially winning. And obviously this bishop holds all these pawns. So yeah, you know, when you see this sort of thing, that you know, that even swapping off that pawn on e5, that black still seems to be in a huge amount of danger, and you know, the power of even white being a pawn down in this ending, but this, you know, powerful e pawn and the king coming in, that this can be so dangerous, probably makes you think that probably that Shredder was completely lost, you know, by the time it got here, because again, this is the sort of ending that Leela plays brilliantly, just shuffling pieces around and yeah, you know, and improving its position slowly. So after rook e1, well, Shredder played h5, and now actually all of the engines jumped to +4, +5. It was, you know, more +2, 2.5 from Stockfish. And even Komodo Dragon starts beating Stockfish. So yeah, that's, I don't mean it nastily, but you know, there were a lot of draws before from in Komodo Stockfish games, but now Komodo starts winning basically every single one, you know. So and it's not at all obvious why. I mean, in some ways you sort of say, well, you know, it looks quite good, doesn't it? You know, just stopping white from getting a bishop g5 to f6, and kind of blocking up the king side. I think the big problem is that you know, white's king side now ends up being completely safe. So you know, we play h4 here, and there's no pieces really that need to be used to defend that white king side, and there's also not even a single target that black has got. You know, you can't attack anything with the light squared bishop. So white's got complete freedom to activate its pieces, and it turns out that having played h5, this makes black's desired fortress actually yeah, makes it completely untenable. Although yeah, it took me a little while to realize just how dangerous it was. So let's have a look what Shredder did. This is basically what was happening in all of my Komodo against Stockfish games. Bishop d6, so the bishop's nice and active on d6, much better than d4, because that gives the king a path to the queen side. Bishop d7, king e4, bishop f5, king d4. So we are looking already to play king to c5. So rook c8 is played, and this is the sort of the fortress that that Leela needs to break. But Leela does it with a little bit of shuffling, but not too much. Rook g2, rook f2. Rook b2 hitting the pawn, bishop d7, that's black's clever resource all the time. Rook b5 allows rook d6 check. Rook f2, bishop f5, rook b2, bishop d7, king d5. Threatening something like rook f2, so rook c8 played, rook f2, bishop f5, and now rook f1. And this is a sort of zugzwang for black, and black's got to do something with its defensive structure. I mean, this is ideal for black. The rook's covering the entry of the king, the bishop's just blocking the f-file, and also covering the b1 square. But yeah, you can't stay like that. If you move the rook away, the king invades. If you move the bishop away, well, that's what you've got to do. But if, for example, you go to d3 check now, well, we've got this similar sort of idea, takes and rook takes e6, and Stockfish is just saying this is completely winning. I mean, the rook's going to come to h6, we're going to pick up this pawn, or if black desperately tries to protect it, we're just either going to queen the pawn or mate the black king. You know, it's that simple. And obviously the king, if it ever gets checked, it just moves over and grabs the b pawn, and then afterwards the a pawn. So yeah, you know, it's just quite amazing that these types of positions with, you would have thought, you know, can't black do something? You know, black's got rid of a few weaknesses, but actually it's just this enormous activity that white's got that just turns out to be too much. So putting the bishop there is wrong, so clearly black's got to stop this e6 move. So bishop e6 looks very natural. And now we go king e4, stopping the bishop from coming back to f5. And then what are we going to do here? Well, we go rook e8, king d4, and now the key thing is here, Shredder went bishop d7, which looked a little bit odd here. You know, why are you allowing the white king to come in here? Shouldn't you just play rook c8? Well, this is the lovely point now, because we go rook f6, king g7, and now this move g6. And black is actually in bad zugzwang here. Obviously, you know, you're attacking the pawn on f7, so this bishop can't move. If you go king g8, I'll just take, and I'll go e6, and it's just curtains. And, well, you would hope that black has got, you know, one move. Rook c6, just stay on there, pawn's protected, stop the king from invading. The only problem here is that we've got this idea, and bishop f8, and then rook takes c6. And obviously white's completely winning here. So, yeah, very, very nice indeed. So after king d4, we go king c5, rook e6, king b6, and yeah, again, black's being, you know, completely squeezed here. Well, you know, probably a good example is this game Stockfish against Dragon in one of my games. I go king c7 after bishop e8. The bishop can't move at all. I go rook f6, and actually, you know, this is just going to end up just winning for white here. Yeah, if you swap off, I just take back, and I've got these moves king d8 and e6 coming in. You know, the bishop's just got no moves whatsoever. So king g7 played, bishop c5. You can't take because I'll go here. King g8, and now king d8. And rook takes c5, bishop e7, which is a lovely little idea. And the bishop on e8 is absolutely trapped. We're just going to go king takes c8, and all of the other squares are just covered. Amazing idea. I mean, b4 was what was played, but obviously Stockfish finds a good way of dealing with that. We can go bishop b4 and pick up the c3 pawn, and there's absolutely no problem. I mean, it's really, I mean, it's, you know, it's absolutely beautiful endgame play, and not at all easy, I have to say. But yeah, seeing this, yeah, I mean, again, for me, it's a very nice lesson in the strength of opposite coloured bishops. And of course, you know, opposite coloured bishops, that was one of the things that you noticed so much in AlphaZero's games. It was so willing to take on positions like this, and well, all of the best engines like Leela and Stockfish, you know, they can do this very well. Komodo Dragon a little bit less well, though, you know, it has also played some good endgames like that. But its assessment of these opposite coloured bishop endings is sometimes not so good. But yeah, certainly Leela and Stockfish are amazing. So rook e8, check, king g7, king c7, bishop e6, king c6, and yeah, as if by magic. How is it possible? The pawn on b5 is just lost. Somehow white's just completely constricted and knocked the black pieces away from good squares. And yeah, bishop can't go to d7, and b8 is covered by the bishop. So, well, Shredder just shipped a couple of pawns, and then, well, I don't know whether Shredder resigned or whether the operator resigned for it, but yeah, this is absolutely winning for white. We just move the king along and then just start moving that pawn. So, so there we are. I mean, I think a really stunning game, and you know, I hope you found it as instructive as I did. I thought it was a really classy game from Leela. And I mean, what's really impressive as well is that you know, obviously in the World Championship, you play from the starting position, unlike the TCEC, and engines are allowed a book, and which means that, you know, it's like the serve in tennis. It insulates you against all sorts of things that you could that can happen in the opening. So, you know, from really you know, basically a 0.20 advantage for white, for Leela just to win this position, and to win it, you know, so beautifully with just not allowing any counterplay whatsoever. It's you know, really good achievement, this one. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed that. If you like this video, why not give a like or subscribe to the channel for plenty more engine videos like this. And otherwise, take a look at my new book, The Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, which has got lots of analysis like this and huge numbers of tips for working with engines. And otherwise, thanks very much for watching, and hopefully see you at the next video.